Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 60 of Behind the Camera with Andy Games, the podcast where we shine a light on the storytellers, the creatives, and the voices behind the camera. This week, I sat down with Guy Morris. After nearly 40 years working in the tech industry, Guy retired to become a writer of intelligent thrillers, and honestly, you might feel by the end of this conversation that Guy's life is one of these novels. I don't really want to give too much away, but we cover all sorts of topics such as Guy's life on the streets at 13 years of age, living on a 50-foot yacht, and even a run-in with the cartel in Latin America. I left this conversation absolutely mind-blown, and I hope it has the same impact on you listening at home. If you'd like to support the show, head over to the About section where you'll find a link to my Linktree. This has everything from social media pages and merch to the website and much more. Like, share, follow, comment, or leave a rating. Every little bit goes a long way, and I truly appreciate it. Now, here's the interview. Guy, welcome to Behind the Camera with Andy Games. Absolute pleasure having you on the show today. How are we doing?
My pleasure, Andy, and thank you so much for inviting me. My pleasure to be here.
No problem at all. No problem at all. So, your story, that's... It's safe to say you've lived quite the extraordinary life. I know you would say that yourself. So I've been very, very excited to have this conversation. So let's just get stuck in. So you worked in tech and AI for the longest time, for 38 years, if I'm correct. But obviously your story started before then with leaving home at the young age of 13. So what can you tell us about from that point going forward into your career at this point in
time? It's been a process of reinvention, trying to just figure out what I needed to do to adapt, to survive at the moment, and still try to figure out if I had how to have a vision for life. There was a long time that I just kept telling myself that I wasn't going to allow my past to define my future. And that my future was that nobody was there to take responsibility for me. No one was going to hand me anything. I wasn't going to get any gifts. I didn't have any rich parents. I didn't have any rich relatives. I wasn't good at winning the lotto. My luck was pretty poor at winning games or anything else. It would take maybe some luck, but a lot of hard work. And I just resolved myself to that at 13, when you have to feed yourself and find a place to sleep and figure out how you're going to survive, you learn that you are the source of your survival. And so I started taking it seriously. Now, it really didn't get super serious. It didn't change a whole lot. I had a lot of menial jobs, digging ditches, building trenches to put home foundations, delivering produce in trucks, working at 7-Eleven stores, working at with migrant workers to pick fruit and clean up ranches in the Southern California. I wasn't really moving in any good positive direction for a few years, but I was given an opportunity that I didn't expect to attend college. Now, I was functionally illiterate. I had dropped out of school with a GED in the 10th grade after being homeless most of the 9th grade. And going to college was absolutely bone-chilling, terrifying. But it was a chance to change my stars. It was a chance to change the path of my life, to change the opportunities that I could experience in my life. And it was one of those risks where it was do or die, and I was determined not to die. So that began. That's how it started. And so I entered college functionally illiterate, not even knowing how to fill out the application. I had to get my first wife to help me fill out the application. I also had to work part-time. My wife was anorexic, so she was quite ill, and we had a toddler. So needless to say, I didn't sleep for 5 years.
Sure.
It took a pretty mean toll on my health. I got a disease called valley fever in my last year, and that kicked my butt for several months. But I was able to graduate. I graduated with multiple degrees. I have master's in economics. I was given a chance to go to grad school, a scholarship to go to grad school. I was accepted into Harvard MBA. I was given an internship at IBM because I had created a macroeconomic model that had outperformed the Federal Reserve and actually changed how the world creates economic models to this day.
Wow.
So that was the pivot point that for me that started everything kind of rolling in a new direction. Now that said, I was still a messed up kid. I was still I had complex post-traumatic stress from all of the reasons why I left home at 13. And I buried those deep inside, but they under stress, and when you're working 80, 100-hour weeks, and when you're under that kind of pressure and that kind of fatigue, if you have post-traumatic stress, that's going to be the time when it's going to start causing you problems.
Mhm.
And so I struggled with, alcohol and other addictions for a number of years, and I had to overcome those issues. And so there was a decades of dealing with the stuff in secret, mainly.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell my boss. You're not going to go to your church and tell them that you're struggling with alcohol and all these other issues and all these other things in your head. And you're not going to go to your boss during performance review and say, no, I really appreciate that great performance review, but I'm really feeling insufficient and lacking confidence because of these other issues that are secret, you don't know about. So I managed them in secret for many, many years. But again, I didn't want to let my past define my future. I didn't sleep for many, many, many years, actually. Lack of sleep became a theme. Actually,
Yeah.
it became a real theme. And then I realized that I actually loved learning things. I actually loved accomplishing things. It was my a dopamine high. It was my runner's high. And so I became somewhat of a workaholic, but it was also I became really I really became I developed a very dysfunctional relationship with leisure. I just don't sit around, and I can't relax and sit around well at all. I get like ants in my pants, and I got to do something, be productive, because there's somewhere in the back of my head, there's a voice that says you would be some homeless kid in the ditch right now on the streets if God hadn't intervened and given you a chance to recreate yourself, and don't waste it.
No, of course.
You were given a chance to make something of yourself. This is your chance. Don't waste it. And so it drives me forward.
It's incredible. Like it's excuse me. It's like right from the very beginning, you've had this fight or flight sort of thing kick in from being 13 years old out in the streets. And it's like, okay, and even having that kind of initiative to just be like, I need to do something, especially at such a young age. And
Yeah.
do you think the fact that you've had like so many jobs and then getting the opportunity to go to college when all odds against you at that point, like you could say that drives your desire and love for learning because of all the skills that you've developed over the years?
I know what it's like to be dumb and hopeless and homeless and having no, that fear of the future haunted me for many years. That, there was this, if I didn't keep up, there was a part of me that because of the PTSD felt that, well, I just got lucky in college. And if I don't keep working twice as hard as everybody else, they're going to find out that I'm not that good and I'm not that smart and I'm a poser. And so that wasn't true, but that was the voice in my head for many years. And so I was constantly egging myself on to overproduce, to overachieve, to, even though I'd get some great, bonus and a reward and performance review for some great innovation that I did, there was never a part of me that could say, okay, well, I can rest on my laurels now. There was always a part of me that was like, okay, what are you going to do now? What now? They're not going to be happy with you unless you're producing something for them today, and so there was always a drive in me, and that drive was good in some ways. I mean, it's certainly pushed me to achieve a lot on a lot of levels, but there's a little bit of a master slave relationship going on in my head that I've had to go to therapy about for many years now,
Yeah.
try and deal with it. And apparently it's not as healthy as I thought it was. So I'm still dealing with that. But yeah, there's a part of me that felt that I had to prove myself.
Mhm.
And I think that there's a part of me that still feels that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand what you're saying because I suppose in one sense you could say that there's how, given the situation you were in all those years ago, the fear of getting back to that place
Yeah.
because, if you feel like you've hit rock bottom, for example, like you don't want to go back there and you've been given this chance and you want to make the most of it. And it just sort of snowballs in a sense where you're just like overproductive and you're just like, okay, this is what I need to do to maintain, well, like you say, to make sure your past doesn't dictate your future. You're letting your present dictate your future with this, which obviously a healthy way to live. And it is just absolutely fascinating. And would you say that just because you have done nothing but stay active and busy from the age of 13 or even younger, that's what drives that? You're just now kind of, you can't relax because even from then on there was always something to be done. So does that carried on into your into these present day?
I am an expert at making work for myself. I am a top of the notch, world class, work generator. I had a joke with my wife the other night that there was a friend of ours who got I'm a writer now, and I do book signings, and I bring other authors with me to do book signings, and I help them become more successful in doing so. And there was one author that she brought her husband to the booth over the weekend, and he was walking around the fair with a T-shirt that said "Ask me about my wife's books" and carrying copies of posters of his wife's books. And I was telling my wife, I said, "You will never ever catch me doing that because I know what happened." She asked him what he was going to do today, and he said nothing. And she found something for him to do. And my wife said, and I said, "You'll never ask me if I have something. I will never tell you nothing." She says, "No, you never will. I never have nothing to do today, and therefore I'm never caught doing something silly for my wife that I'm going to regret later, or somebody takes photos and videos." So yeah, there's a survival skill in there, I think. But there's also a genuine thirst for knowledge.
Mhm.
Once you start to learn how to put the world in, decode the world's complexities
Yeah.
that way, from economics to geopolitics to resource and supply chain management, from the dirt in the ground to the product in your hand. Once you've learned to deal with the sciences involved in quantum computing and other the technologies that we're advancing on, the things that are now making our artificial intelligence or machine intelligence a reality, there's so much to learn. There's so much out there. There's so much information. I open up my browser every day, and it's like being in the Library of Congress on my desktop. And there's a part of me that that is fulfilled that wants to become, well, let me put it this way. When I was in college, I was deeply inspired by men of the Renaissance. Now, most people think of Renaissance and they think pure art.
Yeah.
But men of the Renaissance were engineers, they were architects, they were artists, they were politicians, they made war weapons, they were strategists, they were men with multiple talents and multiple skills because it reflected the diversity and the richness of the world's development at that time. And there was a part of me that in college, going from a street kid that nobody would eat, that I was absolutely invisible to the world as a street kid. And anybody who's walked down a street where there's homeless people, you don't look in their face, you don't look in their eyes, you don't ask their names. They're invisible to you. And I was invisible. And learning all of this stuff, becoming a sponge to absorb the joy of learning about the world, somehow makes me a part of it in a way that I don't no longer feel invisible.
Yeah, of course.
And that love of learning is just as important as the drive to succeed. Was I fell in love with the process of learning and growing and expanding who I am and what I know and what I can do. And that helped balance that sense of worthlessness that I was raised with.
That really, really does put it into perspective, especially like today, this day and age. I think you do get people who don't really know how good they have it, especially when
Yeah.
people do have an unwillingness to learn, education standards dropping, and I think, yeah, 100% puts it into perspective, because, well, knowledge is power. To bring an old cliche out, knowledge is power, but like that's the reason that is widely said is because it's so true. Like, look at what you can do with not just knowing things, but a desire to know things, and a willingness to learn things, even if something isn't as clear to you, but wanting to find a way that helps you learn it helps you learn it. That's incredible. Like, honestly, it is just such a refreshing
One of my
perspective.
favorite memes for a long time was one that said, "Find joy in, find joy in the willingness to do something new that you suck at." Be willing to stink at something new, and that's the truth. You're not going to be really good at everything if you get started, but there's a process of growing and learning and adapting. And I think that's what I enjoyed. It was music for a long time, and then going from being a musician to a songwriter, and a songwriter to recording. And then when I learned to love to sail, I want to be a really good sailor. So I got a Coast Guard charter captain license and chartered my boat and took people out sailing with me. And I went diving, and diving wasn't good enough. I wanted to go dive wrecks, and I wanted to go feed sharks. That there was I, I I am a little obsessive in that, so I definitely have an OCD problem, but I'm learning to use it to my advantage, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think there is always a way to do that as well. But I actually kind of glad you mentioned that, because I did want to touch upon the points about you having your charter captain's license and your shark diving, and like, where did these things originate from? Like, I think it's just incredible, especially when you take from being like a tech and AI expert for decades, and then you have all these other different sort of passions and things that you've done on the side. Like, I'm very keen to talk about these.
Well, before I went to college, I had a dream that I would, yeah, poor kids, what is, now I'm a short, midget of a man, so I'm not going to be a basketball star. So athletics was out of the question. And so one of the other things that poor people can do is become an entertainer, right?
Mhm.
That's one of the only ways that poor people can find a way to path to success. And I thought mine would be through music for a while. Now, I really wasn't all that good. So I'm grateful that God gave me another direction to go. But it was something I loved. And so, but there was another thing. I lived in California, on the coast of California, and I would sit on the beach and I would look out on the water, out in the Santa Monica Bay, and I'd watch all these sailboats out there all the time. And I just thought, I have a hard time relaxing, as I mentioned.
Mhm.
But I know that when I'm on a sailboat, there's something about the motion, the quiet, the peace, the wind, the dynamics of being on a sailboat. When you turn off that engine and it's just you, the wind, and the water, that's magical for me. It's almost like my tranquilizer.
Yeah.
It can take my hyper anxiety nerves and just kind of calm it down to a little level where I'm just like, okay, this is my resting point. And so when I was in California during I think some of the most challenging times of my career, I was living on a 50-foot sailboat.
Oh,
And
wow.
with my son, I was raising my son. We were living on a boat, and we would go out. I couldn't afford a home and a boat, and so I chose
Okay.
the home. Everybody has those. If I couldn't, the prices, I was still recovering from a divorce and all the financial loss from a divorce, and so I really couldn't afford the kind of condo and home that I would really want to put my son in. But the neighborhood around the marina was a really nice neighborhood, nice restaurants, nice condos, nice schools. I could live in one of the nicest, most expensive neighborhoods in the city. All I had to do was be willing to live on a boat. And I thought, Fair enough. Now, my son wasn't really happy about it at the time. He looked back on it now with fondness. But at the time, he thought, well, all of his other friends had their own rooms and big closets and big, video games on their consoles and all of these other things. And he just had a boat. But it was ironic that all of his other friends kept wanting to come down to the boat and hang out on the boat with him. So it took him a little while to realize how blessed he was, but he finally knows now. But yeah, it was so that was a choice. And so since I had the boat, and I wanted to explore being good at what I did. And I thought, well, it would be nice if I could maybe charter this out once in a while. I could make money to pay for the maintenance of the boat, but I wanted to do it legally. So I wanted to get insurance, and I wanted to get good insurance. And so since I was a single parent and I couldn't go out gallivanting around LA bars and clubs all night, probably a good thing. It forced at the time the internet hadn't fully formed, so I had lots of time at night to study on things and work on things. And I'd either start writing short story books for my son, or I started studying for doing musician stuff, and I started joining bands, and I got invited to write for Disney, and then I learned my Coast Guard license. And it was a process of using my time effectively while I was waiting for the right woman to come along in my life. And there was a while I thought that would never happen. So I thought, well, I might as well be happy with who I am and what I'm doing. If I'm going to be by myself, I'm going to live a rich life, and I'm going to make it work. Now, fortunately for me, my second wife came along. We've been married for 32 years. She's an absolute angel of a woman. She puts up with all my idiosyncrasies, and I really got lucky, and she asked me to marry her.
Wow.
I was cognizant enough for the moment to say yes, even though I was absolutely dead terrified of getting married again. And so much so that when we first got, there's funny stories about the whole process that actually pieces of it get put into various books. But yeah, that was an adventure in and of itself. But it's changed. It has made such an enormous difference in my life. So I look at all the steps of my journey, and I'm always focused on what challenge am I trying to overcome at that point. Until I retired and I started doing podcasts and people started asking about my life, I never really even thought about the scope of it, and the fact that for most people, I've accomplished a lot during these different waves, because I've always been focused on what's next. What am I going to do now? What am I going to do tomorrow that's going to make me feel like my life has a purpose of some kind? And I'm always focused on that future, not on the past. And so it didn't even dawn on me that maybe I had lived a rich life until people started telling me. Like, okay, I guess I can see that argument. I haven't. I'm thinking of all the things I haven't done yet. I still got this enormous bucket list, and it's like, okay, well, I'm focused on the bucket list, and everybody else is focused on the trail up to now. And it's another reaffirmation that however happened, whatever happened, however it was that sent me to college, that was a gift from heaven to change my stars.
It's absolutely incredible. And I think it goes to show that sometimes, whenever you're kind of going through life and you're working from one thing to the next, you're building something, even building your legacy, if you want to say that,
Yeah.
then you just sometimes forget to take a minute to look back at what you've done. And even though you're fully aware, you're fully mindful of everything you've done, but it's more, I guess, taking the time to appreciate what you've done and the situations you were in, and like, not in a comparative way, but just to be like, not many people have done this. This is actually kind of like, wow. Like, and I suppose it's just testament to why people are asking you on the podcast to hear your story,
And if I compare myself, I did do a lot of comparisons, but I was always comparing myself to people who were accomplishing more.
Mm.
I kept thinking, oh, that guy's already a super world success at 30, and here I am just struggling through the corporate, chainmail, and there was a part of me that was always comparing myself to others who were accomplishing more, faster, better than I was. But I was never comparing myself to people who were doing less because that wasn't my goal. And
Mhm.
so there was always a sense of you're not good enough yet, or keep going, you got it, maybe someday you'll get that little lucky thing and that'll kind of scoot you up that curve, up curve. But it was more of I said, constantly looking forward to say, well, what do I want to accomplish now that's going to give some meaning to me? And after a while, I gave up trying to compare myself to others and that envy of others' success. That I realized that was kind of a sand hole. That was
Mhm.
a quicksand, kind of mentality. And but I started looking at, well, what is it that's going to give me meaning? What's going to give me joy? What's going to help me fulfill? What am I really passionate about right now that I want to fulfill? What are the things that I feel are purposeful right now? And those I started focusing more on those things because I had opportunities to lead organizations, and I realized I didn't really want to do that. I
Mm.
didn't really want those senior leadership roles. I reported to those senior leaders. They all relied on me for my expertise. I was more interested in solving the problem that everybody else had failed at solving. I wanted to go after and fix something that and I would go in. I can't tell you how many times I would have a conversation with my boss that would go something like this. What you just did was amazing. You just got a bonus. The president signed off on it as a special thing. What do you want to do in your next job? Right. And I'd say, well, I want to go work over here, or
Mhm.
I want to start a group and do this because I think we're failing as a company to do that. And they would say, okay, well, write your job description, build your staff, and tell me what you think your goals ought to be, and let's go do it. And so many times in my career, I was given that opportunity to basically, well, what do you want to do now? And that is an amazing gift that not a lot of people get. And it allowed me to really kind of focus on just staying focused on what next, not
Mhm.
trying to rest on what I did, but what else can I do that's going to keep me engaged in solving something and keeping my mind busy and not just going through the routines and getting lazy.
Yeah.
And I feel pretty blessed. But at a certain point in time, there's only so many decades you can. And remember, I started working on my own, um, long hours at 13, 14 years old. So I was doing, by the time I was in my late 50s, I'd already been doing that for several decades. And I was starting to get a little burned out.
Mhm.
I needed a little bit more rest. I was constantly exhausted. It was starting to affect my health. It was starting to affect my attitude towards life. And that was when I decided it was time to retire early. And I could have said I left, and it was a difficult decision because I had to sit with my wife because I was making the kind of money that by retiring early, if I'd worked another 10 years, I left millions of dollars on the table.
Mhm.
And so we had to ask the question. So, well, we don't have as much as we wanted, but do we have enough?
Mm.
And that question of that value assessment of, do we have enough? Are we comfortable? Are we hungry? No. Are we cold? No. Do we feel unsafe? Do we feel that we live in a bad neighborhood? Do we have enough to feel content with what we have and not kill ourselves for a reason just to make somebody else richer and to have money that we're not going to spend before we die anyway? So we made some value, those are value choices. And we were blessed to be able to do those because there's a lot of people that don't have that choice to say, well, I have enough. I can cut back a few years early and start reinvent myself again. And but that's what I decided to do. And when I did that, I knew in my heart that I wanted to be an author. And
Mm.
I wanted to be an author because I had written some short stories for my son. I enjoyed the process, and I had the experiences I had accumulated through my career all gave me things that I really felt that I wanted to tell the world about. but I wanted to do it I didn't want to do it in a nonfiction, preachy, gloom and doom, here's problems, with that we got to deal with kind of way. I wanted to do it in the way that James Bond used to help me cope with the Cold War, right? We would go to school and we'd do duck under the tables. Okay, bomb drill. We'd go hide under tables. And even as an 8-year-old kid, I'm thinking, now, how the heck is this going to save us from a bomb? But that's what we did. And yet we would go to the movies on the weekend and we'd watch James Bond battle the Russians. And while the Cold War didn't end, the world was still a dangerous place. He saved us for the day. And so there was a part of me that said, well, if I'm going to write stories about the world and real issues and real things, I want to do it with that much fun. I want my readers to learn to go through the issues, to really deal with it. But I want them to have characters and plots and themes and attitude. It's all about the attitude of the characters, right? You gotta have characters that have a little bit of a snarky, anti-establishment, anti-authoritarian, you don't really care to follow the rule book, kind of characters, and they're laughing at, they know that they could die and they're willing to deal with that, and so you can have humor about it. And so that's what I want to do. I wanted to write intense stories about real issues, saturated with real facts that are so much fun to read and so engaging, you have a hard time putting them down, but so provocative in the real issues that we deal with, and that want to make you think about them for weeks after you do put it down. So that was my next goal. And so far, I'm having a really fun time doing that.
Yeah, I can imagine. And because it is such an incredible thing to go into writing, just putting your thoughts down on a page. But what interests me about that the most is the fact that these are dramatizations of true stories, whether it be things that you've experienced or things that have happened just in general life. How did you find the writing process then of turning something very real into a fictionalized, dramatized version of that?
Humbling. Very humbling. You think that you're a smart person. You write reports and proposals and policies and technical things, and you can put a draft together for the CEO and get him to change his mind or approve a multi-million-dollar deal. And you think you got your act together, and then you have to go start writing a story that deals with characters, character arcs, plots, themes, counter characters, antagonists, protagonists. It's got to work. It's got to connect. And Stephen King became my mantra when he said that first drafts always suck. And it was a humbling process for me to realize that it was a much different animal to write a compelling, entertaining, provocative narrative than to write all the other stuff I was writing. And I had to learn new skills. And so it was humbling, but it was also exciting because it gave me a new skill to learn.
Yeah.
And I took some classes. I actually took my first book that I had worked on and off on during my career, and it took me actually 12 years to actually research the book, another several years on and off to write it. And I took that, I hired when I was still working and I still had lots of money just to burn, I hired a really expensive developmental editor from Simon Schuster. And I asked her, I said, I think this is a good story. It's taken me 12 years to research it. I think there's an amazing revelations that I came up with during those 12 years. And it was to solve the mystery of why Henry Morgan would abandon over $1 billion in treasure, along with 600 souls and 3 ships that were never seen again. But Morgan survived, went insane, and burned his logbooks. And I was able to connect during my research that one of the source of his insanity really had its origins with the Mayan creation myth. And so it was a really bizarre journey for me, and I really wanted to write about it. And so I gave it to her, and I asked her, and I said, and I thought it was pretty good. I thought she'd come back and say, well, you're pretty good. You had these minor things to deal with, but I think this is a good book. She came back with 44 single-space typewritten pages of notes, things that I had to learn, major courses I needed to take, major problems I needed to stop doing, major things I needed to start doing. And every page of the manuscript had notes and markups.
Wow.
I sat there for 3 days licking my wounds thinking, oh God, I suck. Maybe I should go be a Walmart greeter. I'm delusional to think I could do this. But there was a part of me that said, okay, well, this is exactly what I asked her to do. I told her I wanted her to rip me a new one and give me everything I needed to do to stitch it back together. I told her, don't be shy, don't be gentle. I've got thick skin, give it to me straight. And boy, did she give it. She gave me reason to be humble. So it took me 1.5 years to fix the things, to go through the things that she told me to do and fix the things she'd asked me to fix. That book ended up, when I finally released it, was actually the second book I published, because it took me so long to fix what I'd done. But in the process, I learned a tremendous amount. Yeah. And that book ended up on Book Trip, which is Barnes & Noble favorite 25 books of 2021. They called it Indiana Jones meets Da Vinci Code, but I like Indiana Jones meets Goonies for grown-ups sprinkled with Stephen King. So that's actually my bestseller when I do my book signings.
Oh, brilliant. I think humbling is probably the best word you could have used for that. Oh my days. Like, I'm sure you're probably like, no matter how thick your skin is, you're probably never ready to get that sort of feedback, or you look through it and you think, no, this can't be. But obviously it's showed its worth in terms of, you've written so many more books since then. And like, would you say that like with every book that you've written, your writing style is like improving, you're happy with what you're writing, and it's like getting easier to do, in a sense?
My latest book, The Image, which is the 4th book that I published, just came out in May. Last month, Reader's House out of London, which is a really prestigious literary gateway out of London, gave me the editor's choice for literary excellence. They asked me for an interview. They did a write-up on my interview, and then they reviewed my latest book, The Image. To go from, oh my God, 44 pages, this book sucks, to a literary excellence award out of London, where they kind of know their literary stuff. That's kind of their thing. I feel very blessed and honored.
Yeah, like I think it's definitely it shows that the feedback you originally got, like that's kind of paid dividends and then some, because like look what it's done for you. Then you become a best-selling author. You've got all these like accreditations for it. Like that's just sort of, I mean, you got to look back at that and think that's incredible.
It's been a journey, but it's hard work. I put 1 year or 2, sometimes 3, into almost every other book of research. Once I even get done with the first draft, I'll typically polish that draft. I'll go through 20, 30, as much as 60 different revisions on a book before I start to feel like, okay, this is starting to read as good as the books that I love to read. So I love the Dan Browns and the James Rawlings and the Steve Berrys and all of the really great thriller authors who put years of research into every book. And part of it too is, I think, that discipline of 40 years of Fortune 500 companies of saying you don't hand something to a CEO unless it's top notch, unless it's high quality. And to do that with writing, it's a lot harder, it's a lot longer, and I find myself going through iteration after iteration after iteration, fixing, tweaking, polishing. No, I can say it better. No, I've said that before. Oh, that's too much. That takes me away from the story. Trying to be critical, trying to keep all of those comments that were given to me, negative comments in my head, to say, well, don't make the same mistake again, get better. And I really do try to push myself each book to say, and there's an honor in getting these kind of rewards, right? And my first book in the series won a gold award from Reader's Favorite International Book Contest. The second book won a silver award, and so. But there's a part of you that then says, oh, oh crap, well, now the next book I've got to be better. I gotta keep raising the bar. And I said, this is getting harder.
Yeah.
Raising the bar is getting harder and harder to do. But you don't want your next book to come out and say, well, that's okay, but it's not as good as the last one.
Mm.
That's the fear of every, I think, director and actor and songwriter and every creator imaginable, I think, has that fear of once they hit that real peak of saying, well, gee, how do I maintain that? And because you don't want to be, well, he was good in his heyday, but that was long ago, and he's not what he used to be, and you fear that being said about yourself. And so there's a part of me that's continuing to try and drive myself to seek better and better topics, to be more and more to be a better writer, to be a better communicator, to really find those themes that resonate with people and build them up to something that is that makes them want more, that makes them want.
Of course, of course. So when it comes to then writing, which side of it would you say that you prefer? Would you prefer the research side of it, considering your research and topics based on things that you've experienced or things that you know, or the story aspect of it and keeping that going, the creative side of it, or even meshing the two together?
I'm going to lean more towards research,
Mm-hmm.
and in part because I love learning new things and finding out new things, and I have a hard time sometimes stopping the research to say, well, I have enough information to make a story. There's always a part of me that says, well, what at that learn something and then immediately starts asking questions. Well, what about this and what about that, and how would this work and how would that work, and well, what happened if this and start wanting to research more. And so sometimes I have to get a point where I say, okay, that's enough for now. Go start trying to turn this into a story. But then you get parts in the story where you say, well, I have to get more research on that part, and you keep going back and forth. But if I didn't love the research, a lot of people will do research, but they don't really love doing it. So they do the minimum they have to do to get away with it, and then they kind of make up the rest. And I'm always more of, well, if I can find real facts rather than make it up, I'd rather implement real stuff than made up stuff.
Yeah.
Because for me, it gives it more authenticity, and particularly for a thriller, which is what I try to write. Really, that ability to take a situation that seems plausible and real and realistic, and then ask the question, gee, what could go wrong? You want that to feel as real as possible to have the optimum impact of raising that anxiety at that moment in the book. And so I think thrillers do require a lot of research, but the story element is also something, that's the part where I'm really having to grow. And that's the part where I'm really having to work myself and second guess myself and ask and get other people's feedback. Gee, when that character experienced that, did you find that believable? Or, and try to understand there's the difference. People will talk about differences of books, that this is a plot driven book, this is a character driven book. And I think the right balance is both.
Yep.
What you really want is a really exciting plot, but then you really want to see the characters. You want to understand what they're experiencing during those intense moments. You don't want to just them go. I resented the books that, like the Jack Reacher kind of stuff, where they're Navy SEALs. They're trained to kill you 7 ways before breakfast for the flag, sir. But they don't really have flaws and character defects and doubts and self-doubts, and they're not really going through real issues, and they're not changing as a character as a result of the experience. And so I think it's perhaps my experience being homeless and growing up poor and growing up having to change, having experiences that made me change.
Yeah.
That makes me want to write characters that also have to force themselves to face themselves. And that's how we change, is by facing ourselves, by saying, well, gee, guy, and looking in the mirror and saying, gee, you might be a nice guy, but there's this aspect about you that really bothers me. And that's really going to that's your Achilles heel, and if you don't solve that, it's going to cause problems for you and your family. And that making sure that you're kind of facing yourself that way. And I think learning to write characters, to put characters and really bring that out, the emotions out in the books, is part of what I've been learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you put it that way, because I spoke to a lot of authors in the past as well on the show, and they've said more or less the same thing when it comes to characters and character development. One of the more important things that as a writer you can give your character is human qualities and relatability to your reader. Because it's like you say, like, you know, the Jack Reachers, where it's just like they're indestructible. You know, as soon as you see the title, you know how it's gonna go, and like that's fine.
Bad
Like
guy,
people are into
beat
that.
them all up, you can beat them
Exactly.
all
Yeah.
up, shoot them all down, blow them up, boom, boom, bang, bang.
Yeah. And
God
like,
save America.
and
You know,
yeah, it's very, very theme and plot driven. But in terms of like the character, there's nothing there. But whenever like someone's reading something that's like, well, I've nothing to really relate to this character about as a person, and you know, you're reading about like a situation that a particular character might be in at any point, even if it's like especially the climax of the book, you know. And when anybody's reading, they like to imagine themselves in the book. Like that's just a fact, whether you want to admit it or not. People do. And like, you know,
absolutely.
like, but if you're at the climax of a book, you want to feel the emotions of what's happening, what's at risk. And if it's just like, I'm going to go in all gung ho and I'm going to save the day, I'm going to get the, it's like, no, that's not real. Like, make, like, at least have it a
No,
way
they're
where
having
the
doubt,
reader can
fear,
relate.
second guesses. Why am I doing this? Am I crazy? Why? Maybe I should be doing that over there. And yeah, exactly. So my characters are deeply flawed, and but they're able to laugh at themselves.
Yeah, and that's important.
And that's an important quality to have in a character. It's a little bit of self-effacing humility. And they're flaws, and they mess things up, and their other friends will tell them that they messed things up, and just like our friends would tell us if we made a stupid mistake. It's like, well, that was bonehead. And so we want that. We want that reality. My main character in the whole Snow Chronicles series, Derek Taylor, he was a homeless. He was in the foster care system as a child, a homeless runaway like me, super smart, super sarcastic and snarky, um, but has lots of flaws, constantly lies, constantly hiding who he is, constantly trying to deceive people. He won't kill anybody for any reason because he just thinks death is too permanent. But he has a way of just overcoming the situation by using brains. And one of the ways I make his character fun is I give him lots of really cool tech toys. So he's kind of a jerk at times, but he's got the coolest toys on the block, and it's almost like if you took a Mike Myers Austin Powers and gave him all the James Bond cool toys.
Yeah.
It's going to be comical as well as cool. So you got to try and balance that out.
Oh, of course.
But yeah, and that's what makes it fun, is trying to kind of come up with characters that are unique and memorable, and not just the cliche characters you read in all these other stories. And my experiences in traveling around the world and meeting some very interesting, strange people has really been a benefit in that way. And in fact, some of the people I've met around the world in my travels in life have ended up as characters in the books. Now, I don't put them in the same role and all that kind of stuff. There's in my first book, the Swarm, there was a number of scenes in Hyderabad, India. Now, when I was at Microsoft, I had 35 people that reported to me out of Hyderabad. And so some of those characters turned into the characters in Hyderabad. I took their personalities and their names, but instead of, working for Microsoft, one, had a clothing store in the garment district, and the other one was a pedicab driver, and the other one was sort of a snarky hacker that kind of lived on the fringes of society. And another one, he was a devout Hindu. I made him a priest. I switch it up a little bit, but it makes it fun.
Yeah.
And there was a woman that I worked with in business. She was actually a customer. She ended up turning to be a hooker out of Amsterdam. So, you take these personalities and these people, and they're fun to be with, they're fun to bounce off of,
Yeah.
and you take that personality and you switch it up a little bit and you put them in the book, and I those are the people I enjoy writing the most.
Of course. And like, how much fun must you have doing that as well? Especially people who've like made an impact on you, and like that's important in a two way system as well, because like that must be so like important and humbling to them as well. It's like that's such an amazing thing that you would want to put me in your book, whether or not you tell them or not is the real question. But
One of the characters in my books was actually a villain out of the Curse of Cortez. Is based on a real guy. His real name was Shea Golan. I didn't change his name in the book. The real Shea was a fugitive from Israel. He was wanted by Interpol, wanted by the FBI. He was living in Cancun doing dirty work for the Zeta cartel. He broke into my condo with a big Doberman and a bodyguard and threatened to kill me if I messed with him. He'd said this in front of my wife. So I was like, oh, no, you didn't. So after I told him that he didn't have the cojones to mess with me, and he had 2 days to get out of my condo, or all hell was going to break loose over his fat head, and he basically took a step back, like he didn't expect me to actually respond to him. After I messed with him in Cancun. I cost him everything he owned. I put him in the book, and I messed with him in the book. I got a twofer.
wow, like fair play. Like, how does that even happen? Like, how does it even come about? Like, getting this, like, oh wow.
Well, the condo we had I had some partners, and we had a condo in Cancun, and we would go down there and stay in, and I would use it as a place to go explore the book and go do other things. And he came in, and we rented it out occasionally, and he came in and somehow convinced the management that he was a renter, and so they let him in, and then he refused to leave. And so I had to fly down to Cancun just to confront him. And when I did, that's when he basically sitting in my own condo, and he basically told me with a Doberman sitting next to him, this very smug look that I'm going to stay here for 3 years, and you can go to the courts, but it'll take them 3 years to kick me out, and in the meantime, this is my place. There's nothing you can do. And I was like, oh hell no, 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 not going to work. That's not the way I am. So I at one point in the whole adventure of getting him out, I actually met with the cartel. I met with supposedly, well, all I met with was a man that was supposedly from the cartel whose name was Jose. We met in the alleyway out behind the Kinko's downtown Cancun at 1 o'clock in the morning. And Jose told me that for only $50K, they would take Shea out to the jungle and no one would ever find him again. I said, well, I have two problems with that. It's a little over my budget right now, and I'm trying to get it down under 25K. And I'm really Lethal's a little, and I'm like my Derek Taylor. Lethal's a little permanent. Can't we just get him out of the condo? So I finally wound up bribing the police to do their job anyway and go get him. They messed it up, and they didn't get him arrested right away. But I got in my condo back. I took everything he owned, everything that was his. I put it just in plastic junk garbage bags, including a 2 by 4 foot safe, which I'm sure had lots of valuable stuff in it. And I put it all out on the street. By morning, it was gone. It cost him everything he owned to mess with me. Now, 2 months later, because of the work I kept doing with the police, they arrested him in a stolen Hummer with an illegal gun. He wound up spending 6 months in jail before he had to pay. The cartel had to pay 50 grand to get him out of jail. So he owed the cartel. The last I heard, he was driving a junk car, living in one. And all this time, I went to every hotel, every apartment, every condo, every place in the whole Yucatan Peninsula with his photograph, his profile, his criminal record. And I basically said, beware of this man. He's a con man. Don't let him in the building. He couldn't rent a storage locker after that.
Oh my God.
So I told him, I'm a street kid. I don't like to be messed with, and I do not like to be threatened. And I wasn't going to hurt him, but I was going to teach him a lesson.
Yeah.
Leave the gringos alone.
Wow. That is, do you know, that alone is worthy of being in a thriller book, movie, whatever. Take my money. That is literally worthy of alone. I am just, and it sounds like you kept your cool all the way through that scenario. That was
Oh no,
just like,
I was livid. I was practically sleepless.
oh wow,
It triggered my post traumatic stress,
yeah,
and it took me months and months and months to get over that experience. Now I was determined.
hmm,
I was I was I was not going to let this con man
yeah,
ruin me,
of course,
and I especially for threatening me in front of my wife. And but it churned up a lot of stuff,
mm,
and it was a difficult experience. But I had to force myself to keep my mind in control so that I didn't do something stupid,
yeah, of course,
right? Because it's really easy in that kind of situation to overreact and to do something reactive. And I needed to keep my wits about me to stay cool, calm, and strategic to really cost him without costing me. Now, at the end of the game, because I took all of his stuff and I put it on the street, he actually filed a lawsuit. He actually filed a criminal charge against me in court so that I was charged with grand theft. And there was a grand theft charge on my head in Cancun for a long time. But I don't, I had, my wife wasn't comfortable. We wound up, because of all of this, my wife didn't want to keep the condo. So we wound up, she didn't want to go to Cancun knowing that he was in town
yeah,
and we might run into him at some point. So, it wasn't 100% pleasant. We didn't, we wound up having to sell the condo, and it was at the time of the market where we had to sell it at a little bit of a loss, which was not good. But, we came out ahead, and so we're okay.
well, yeah,
It's typical, I think, of my determination, um, not to go back to being a street kid again, and being
mhm.
threatened with murder in front of my face felt that was a definite trauma trigger.
Hmm. Oh, of course. And I think as well, if you wanted to put like a positive on it, like you've been able to sort of take something like that, put it into your creativity, into your art, and just be like, well, this is a story, this is a character, these are his characteristics. And when you do that, even on a general level, you're putting a piece of yourself into
Yeah.
your works, and that's something that will never die. It'll always be there. You'll always know it, and the people you talk to, they'll always know it, and it just keeps the spirit of everything just going, and that's like such an important thing. Like just to really
Well,
kind of highlight your
it's very
experiences.
cathartic to be able to deal with some of my own traumas and put them in
Hmm.
character. Now, there's a friend of mine who's really wanted me to write an autobiography. He said, "Guy, you've survived all these things. You should write an autobiography." A lot of people love autobiographies. I don't love them. I didn't want to. I didn't want to learn from somebody else's life. I just needed to figure out mine.
Yeah.
I had so much work to do to figure out mine that trying to figure out how to translate somebody else to me, too much work. But that would be very difficult to do, to be very raw and honest about
Yeah.
me. But it's easier, and it's actually therapeutic for me to say, well, I'm going to take this character over here and I'm going to let him have that experience, or I'm going to let him have that character flaw, or I'm going to let her have that um, bad dream or that trauma, and it allows me to diffuse it through
Hmm.
various characters. So it's never one character, but it's diffused through many of them. And it allows me to kind of get it out without feeling exposed.
Yeah, of course. Of
Yeah.
course. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Like you just sort of your characters will just be peppered with like your experiences and different sort of things, helps you sort of not like, well, like you say, be exposed, and really, the eagle-eyed readers would probably be able to piece it
Yeah.
together, and like if they want to know more about you, they just have to pay a little bit more attention to the characters that they're reading about.
And I have to say, well, if Morris is in all of these, he's a messed up person. That boy better get therapy.
Well, Guy, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. This has been such an incredible conversation, so enlightening, just and honestly a breath of fresh air. So I would just like to give you the floor just before we wrap up, just to let the listeners know where can they find you.
Well, I'd love for you to buy my books. All of them have won at least one award. They all have amazing reviews. Go to GuyMorrisBooks.com. There's links to buy. There's also, you can, if you want an author signed copy, you can buy it from my website. There's highlights from reviews. There's fact versus fiction pages, because every book is saturated with fact. I'm transparent about telling you what's true and what I'm making up. And I'm also on Instagram and LinkedIn. I don't do Facebook anymore. I do Blue Sky, and I quit Twitter because I don't like Elon. You know, I'm an odd person, but I write amazing books.
Absolutely love that. Yes, once again, Guy, thank you so much for your time. Been an absolute pleasure. Take care.
Thank you, Andy.
And there you have it. That brings us to the end of episode 60 of Behind the Camera with Andy Games. A huge thank you to Guy Morris for such an amazing conversation. If you enjoyed the story, I would highly recommend checking out his books, because after this conversation, I feel like it really helped bring the books more to life. Once again, if you'd like to support the podcast, my link tree in the About section has everything from socials, merch, website, all of the good stuff. A follow, rating, share, it all goes a long way. Until next time, take care, stay creative, and I'll see you soon. But until then, peace.